I'd like to call to order Bristol, Virginia City Council for May the 14th, 2019. This time, please join me in a moment of silence. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good to see everybody here tonight. So hope we got a lot of people signed up for public comment. So is that the sheet? Okay. So if you haven't signed up, make sure you list what item you want to talk about, non-agenda or specific, and then when you get up, make sure you state your name and your address. So we got that. So with that, any council comments before we get started?
I'd like to remind everybody they put a notice in all our boxes, but they're going to have the Memorial Day service on the actual Memorial Day holiday this year, May 27th. I know in the past it's been the traditional Memorial Day of May 30th, so it's a little bit of a change, but hopefully it's a good change that more people can come out as they have that day off, and I'd encourage everyone to come at noon that day and honor all those who have served our country. Yes, Jackie.
All right, City Manager.
Council and public as well. One thing that we have scheduled actually last night and today, on May the 30th, there will be a joint public meeting with the City Council and with the school board in regards to how do we move forward with the school funding, how do we deal with renovations, or whether we have a new school that be moderated by Carol Cash. We'll probably do that over at the school board office. They have a bigger facility for that moderation. So we have settled on the date of May the 30th.
Okay. Is that it? All right, with that, is there any items on the agenda we want to adjust at all? Be thinking about that. All right, matters be presented by the public, non-agenda items. I guess we got Nancy Morney. Okay. Michael Pollard.
Thank you. My name is Michael Pollard. I live at 101 Ashley Drive. I've heard a lot of people making comments concerning the irregularity of trash pickup, and that's now been, I now have firsthand experience of some of that. I don't know if you want me to wait until the agenda item concerning changes, but this is more concerning inconsistent handling of such. Currently, the code requires that, or interpretation of the code allows trash to be laid alongside of the can, and that is also supposed to be picked up. The current management of solid waste says that no, if it's not in the can, that's billed separately. I had a small amount alongside of my can. The can was collected, the trash alongside was not. The next day I put it in my can because it did all fit in the empty can. Similarly, along the line of code enforcement, I had done a lot of cleaning, which was why my can was full with extra trash. I was not able to get everything back into the house when it started raining on Saturday night, and I had it covered up. And Monday, I had a code violation tag on my door for having clutter that was visible from the road. While my initial impression was, yes, I'm glad that our new code enforcement officer is doing his job and being proactive, someone else brought up the idea that I wonder if he is similarly tagging all of the houses in the city that have had trash out for months or years. Because this was the first business day that I had trash visible from the road that I had a tag. And I'm wondering if there is equal enforcement. Concerning trash, it is also required by code that the can lid be reseated solidly on the can, and that is in the same code that requires all of the residential requirements. The city staff are also required by code to put the lid back on. It's all part of the same code. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jackie Knopflin.
To the mayor, to the vice mayor, Mr. Farland, Mr. Osborne, Mr. Harley, thank you for attending our forum. We appreciate it that once you was able to come. We understand that the daughter had a graduation. I wouldn't have been there either. But thank you all for attending the forum. The school board was also there, and they understood from the call that night that you would be mummed and wouldn't be able to speak. You was told that night before, you were told earlier in the day, and then Mr. East came at 6:07 to tell you each again in the middle of our forum as we were getting started. I found it to be disruptive, so I asked him to sit down then. He continued on speaking. I asked him to sit down, and finally, he did sit down. The purpose of the forum, as you noticed by your invitation, we sent Mr. Ease an invitation as well. 2 weeks prior, it hit your box at the night of the city council meeting. All of you were aware. My question is, if a notice had to be sent out in order for 3 of you all to meet at the same time, why wasn't that done? Or why wasn't Virginia Organizer, someone whose name was on your invitation, contacted and said, this is the proper way to do this, this is our policy, so forth and so on? Why contact the superintendent and have all the board members with all the excuses that they gave? Because simply, we had only 3 people attending, 2 were city council members, 1 was the school board. It would have looked better if no one would have shown up except those 3. What made it look bad was you went to the most impoverished area of our city with a community that is hurting. A community that came out, not 30, but there were actually 45 or 46 people there because some of the parents popped their heads in and out the door, and I handled them, or had them counted. People came in to hear and to see if you really showed up. They were excited. This has never happened before. We made history. It never happened before, but we did bring you together. And since then, you've been coming together, calm-mannered, and meeting and trying to get things together. But why the strategic move to mum you in the middle of a community that needed to hear from you the most? Is there something that we don't know? Is there something that was said in your private meeting, Mr. Farham? Is there something that happened with you, Mr. Eads? Mr. Elvis? Mr. Hartley, was there something said that wasn't supposed to went public? Are we actually going to do the $200,000? Can we afford it? Are we going to Mr. Vanguard? Are we going to Band-Aid it, fix it for a while? Mr. Mayor, are we going to get started on it and then have to keep going and get stuck there? Are we going to end up with the 4-1? That's already been voted out. What about the 3-1? The idea that Virginia Organizing came up with. Highland View, Washington and Lee come together. We don't have a lot of complaints from Washington and Lee. Matter of fact, I have none. They need and want a new school. Put those 2 together, find a piece of property, discuss this thing 5 years down, and the last thing was 5 years down the road. Why put another 6 months on hold for that PPD duty? Why put another 6 months on that when we can apply for grants to help out with that $100,000, $200,000? We found grants. They're all over the place. It would help the schools. We have to do something. We have to take action now. But what you did, sir, was really embarrassing, and it looks on you. Not the school board. It looks bad on you. Because when it comes down, I know about 3 months back of that, but when it comes down, when it boils down, they're going to look at the city and they're going to say, the city didn't give us the money. The city did this. Because of the act that he did. If you all agreed with what he did, then I'm disappointed in all of you. Because that just wasn't the right way to handle that. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just make a comment, I think what my understanding was the biggest deal with the forum on this past Thursday night was, I think there's just a little bit of confusion on our end about how many folks were coming, who all was going to be there, as far as if anytime there's a majority of council, there has to be certain types of notices put out. So, but I want to take a moment and say, Ms. Knopflin, I appreciate the work you guys are doing, fighting for the school system, for the parents, for the kids, for the teachers. I've only been sitting up here for about 6 months, which is a relatively short amount of time, but I do feel like, the school system has been a big topic for a while, and I'm optimistic about the future. It only makes sense that the city council and the school board work together and work hard to do what's right, what's best for our communities, for our kids, our teachers, our parents. So overall, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to get some stuff done soon and do the right thing.
Thank you all.
Stacy Almerod.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council members. Just wanted to take a minute and thank you all for coming to the forum Thursday night. As you know, things didn't go as we planned. We didn't have the dialogue that we wanted. However, your attendance does speak volumes for your willingness to work with our school board and bring our schools up to ADA compliance and safer for our students. We sincerely hope that this is only a stepping stone and the continued progress is being made in making our schools safer and Bristol a better place to live and learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor Smith.
I have some material for you gentlemen, which is the subject matter that I'm talking about.
Okay. You can hand it to Nicole there.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Victor Smith. I live at 169 Chester Hill Road. The subject matter that you have is a subject which I am quite concerned about. My neighbor has a pasture with 2 horses, and it's about 50 or 60% covered with buttercups. This is a panorama picture. I have a program and I combined several shots. If you pan over to the left, you will see that there's a horse out there. It's not showing right now. It's got to go a little further. It's a slider. Oh, if he zooms it up to about 50% instead of the, so that's the whole panorama. That's the Merrill property that he went through bankruptcy and now has been purchased by Mr. Veers, I think. Okay, this is, if you can go to the left, you'll see that there's a horse in this pack, If you can zoom that up so that you can really see all the buttercups, it's about, you can zoom it up some more. Okay, now if you go over to the left, you'll see there's a horse in it, but you also see there's a substantial amount of large weeds, and the yellow there is the buttercups. That section of the pasture is, like I said, probably 50–60% covered with buttercups. Now, buttercups will not disappear if you mow them. They are a perennial. They have a taproot, and the only way you can eliminate them is by using an herbicide. There's several herbicides on the market. One will protect clover. It will not kill clover. Most of them will have 2,4-D as one of the items, which will destroy the buttercups. They're very progressive in their spreading about. As a matter of fact, on the other side of the barn, which if you slide over to the barn, is my property. Beyond that, and there's another section of the pasture with buttercups just as heavy as these. And you can see the large plants there, which are weeds, which should be destroyed. Up in the right-hand corner, you can see how heavy the buttercups are. If the grass is filled with buttercups, so that the horses do not have vegetation to eat, they will eat the buttercups, which if you look at the back of the page that I passed out, you'll see a nose of a horse. That's what can happen to horses if they get into the buttercups. Normally, they will not eat the buttercups unless there is no forage. They can cause them to have diarrhea, also all the way to death. Also, one thing that a lot of people do not understand.
Time's up. Let's bring it along. Your time's up, so let's hurry up and finish up.
Okay, buttercups are also poisonous to people. If you break them off, the sap can cause you to have I think it's dementia. But one thing I'd like to ask you, if your granddaughter was out there and said, "Oh, look at the pretty flowers," and picked one and got some of that sap on them, and it could poison them, then I'm wondering if you would agree with me that those buttercups need to be destroyed.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, it's the last person signed up for non-agenda items. Any adjustments to the agenda before we move into the regular agenda? All right, on to item 1, consider public hearing on an ordinance to repeal sections 66-46, 66-48, and 66-50 of the Code of Ordinances Personnel. I hereby open the hearing. Staff comment.
Council, as we continue to try to fix this city and make it more efficient and effective, not only for employees but for residents, one thing that has come to my attention, we do have basically our personnel policy is outlined by ordinance, and I've checked with other localities throughout Southwest Virginia. I've also checked with BVU. Their personnel policies are not by ordinance, and so the first 3 ordinances that I'm asking the council to repeal deal with annual leave, sick leave, and compensatory leave. The reason for this is it's based on the verbiage of working day. As you go through these code sections, it mentions working day, and it should really, for us to for it to be effective across all departments, it needs to be referenced in the amount of hours. The second piece of this puzzle is if these things are in a policy, it will make it easier for me to come to council and say we need to change this policy, and we can do that relatively quickly, whereas if we have an ordinance change, we have to advertise it, we have to have the first reading, the second reading, then it takes 30 days for it to go into effect. So you're effectively looking at a 75 to 90-day process to get an ordinance changed into law. So over the next several meetings, maybe further on in the summer, you'll see some more of these come before us where I'll be asking council to remove a lot of these personnel sections. We'll put them in policy. The policies will still have to be approved by council, and it just removes several requirements for us at this time.
Can you maybe explain a little bit more about why the hours versus days, so everybody kind of understands the context
Sure.
of why you're asking to change it?
You know, we have several different departments in the city that work, you know, your typical employee works 8-hour days. We have police officers who work 12-hour days, firefighters work 24-hour days. So when it comes to crediting time, a work day for a firefighter is different than a work day for me or my staff. And we have to be consistent across the board in order that everybody get time appropriately credited for what they have worked and what they've earned. And when we set it out in the policy, we'll be able to set this out per, and at the moment, the only departments I see that would need to be separated would potentially be the police and fire. So that would be separate underneath the policy so that it's completely separate from everyone else. The fire department understands what they get credited, what they have to take, and the same with every other employee now, because as it reads right now, it can be a little bit confusing as to how time gets credited and what one is supposed to take whenever they do take leave.
Okay. All right, no one signed up for public comment, so I hereby close the hearing. Item 2, consider public hearing on the sale of city-owned property at Elbert Street.
Council, we've received an offer on 2 lots at Elbert Street, and I misspoke this morning when I met with Mr. Wingard and Mr. Hartley. It's, I think Gene's gonna pull that up here in just a second. It's the one I sent you with the circle on it. You had it pulled up a second ago. These 2 lots are at the end of Elbert Street, right before they go into Sullins Academy. You can see they're circled there. There's 2 lots that have been for sale, and we have received an offer on those for $15,000.
Okay, no one signed up for public comment, so I hereby close the hearing. All right, consider public hearing on an ordinance to amend Chapter 70 of the City Code of Ordinances, Solid Waste. Hereby open the hearing. Staff comment?
Council, this is a continuation of what we discussed at the last meeting, I think at the last meeting in April. We're continually working on some of those ordinance changes. We could not get those fully accomplished to get those out for a vote tonight. So we did go ahead with the public hearing so we could hear comments from the public and maybe incorporate any changes that the public may have in regards to some of those ordinances. As I mentioned previously, I believe we all recognize that there's many changes that need to be made to that solid waste ordinance. We want to make it, one, easily understandable by everyone so that everyone knows what they're required to do. You know, Mr. Pollard made some great points earlier tonight in regards to, you know, the lid having to be closed, and we just need to clean things up. And it's, you know, several ordinances that we need to do. So tonight is just an opportunity for the public to make any comments in regard to that so that we can take those into consideration before I bring those to the council.
Okay, this is item 3, so one person signed up. It's Michael Pollard.
Thank you. Again, my name is Michael Pollard. I live at 101 Ashley Drive. Since no draft was proposed, I don't know exactly what is being recommended at this time, but since the appendix is part of that chapter, I delayed part of my comments earlier to this point where it would be more appropriate. Whether it's done now or later, I would like to see that the container fees be handled in a fair manner. And by that, I don't mean low, I mean fair, that is equal, evenly applied to all. It has been brought to my attention, while it doesn't apply to me personally, that with the changes that have been recently approved, there is a fairly large fee, 50% of the regular fee for additional containers. The way things have been, individuals pay for those containers with the promise that they will then be able to have them collected at no additional fee. The first container, they pay a monthly fee and get the container for free. The second container, they pay for the container and then get collection for free, together with the original fee. With the recently approved change, a lot of people will have paid for their containers, and now they'll also have to pay for collection. I would like the council to consider changes in the code with the overall changes, and whether the fees be adjusted now or later, because I know that we do have some hefty costs coming up shortly. I would like to see a consideration as to whether the people who have already paid for their containers perhaps get an exception on the monthly fee, and that going forward, if individuals are going to pay per month for the second container, that they should similarly get that second container included in with their fee so they don't have to pay extra for it. One way or the other, so that people aren't charged twice. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, no other comment. Hereby close the hearing. All right, item 4, consider proclamation on National Travel and Tourism Week. Staff report.
Council, we have a proclamation before us tonight just to recognize National Travel and Tourism Week. I think you should have a copy in front of you, Mayor, if you want to read that, or I can read it either way.
I can read it. It says, whereas travel has a positive effect on Virginia and the nation's economic prosperity and image abroad, whereas travel impacts business productivity and individual travelers' well-being, whereas travel to and within the U.S. provides significant economic benefits for the nation, generating more than $2.5 trillion in economic output in 2018, with nearly $1 trillion spent directly by travelers, whereas travel is among the largest private sector employers in the U.S., supporting 15.7 million jobs in 2018, including 8.9 million directly in the travel industry and 6.8 million in other industries, whereas traveler spending directly generated tax revenues of $171 billion of federal, state, and local government funds used to support essential services and programs, whereas the travel and tourism industry contributed $55.4 million to the Bristol, Virginia economy, generated $2.6 million in tax revenues and $1.6 million in local tax revenues, and 510 jobs in the Bristol, Virginia in 2017. Whereas international travel to the U.S. is the nation's #1 services export and #2 overall. Whereas meetings, events, and incentive travel are core business functions that help companies strengthen business performance, educate employees and customers, and reward business accomplishments, which in turn boost the U.S. economy. In 2018, domestic and international business travelers spent $327.5 billion, whereas leisure travel, which accounts for more than 3/4 of all trips taken in the U.S., spurs countless benefits to travelers, health and wellness, creativity, cultural awareness, education, happiness, productivity, and relationships. Whereas travel is a pillar of economic growth, creating jobs at a faster rate than other sectors, whereas welcoming visitors from near and afar always has been and always will be the enduring ethos of the travel industry in Bristol. Whereas travel matters to Bristol, thereby I, Mayor Mumpower, do hereby proclaim 5/11/2019 as National Travel and Tourism Week in Bristol, and urge the citizens in Bristol to join me and Discover Bristol in the special observance with appropriate events and ceremonies. And someone's here to accept the proclamation? We want to do that now or after we, I guess we need a council second a motion before we present her with the, you can come on up. Need a council second a motion on the proclamation.
Make a motion that we approve the proclamation.
Second?
Okay, any discussion? All right, please call the roll.
Farnham.
Yes.
Hartley.
Yes.
Osborne.
Yes.
Wingard.
Yes.
Mumpower.
Yes.
If I could just say thank you, Beth Reinhardt with the Bristol Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate your all's support in this. It was actually last week, but you all did not meet last week, so we appreciate your all's recognition of that and the opportunity.
All right, item 5, discussion on school funding and other long-term alternatives.
Council, I know there's been a lot of discussion in regards to school funding, not only for this year, but in our future as well. And I think most of you are aware now that previously there had been a discussion amongst certain council members and certain school board members as to how to fund certain specific needs for to fix some of the compliance issues we have in regards to ADA. So Ms. Knopflin, I can assure you that there was nothing that Mr. Farnham and Mr. Alvis or I were trying to hide at the meetings that we had. This is what has come out of that meeting, and you will see on the May 28th council meeting that there will be a $100,000 supplemental appropriation to go over to the school system to start beginning some of that work. So in order for us to fund some of this, we had to find $200,000 in order to do that. The first $100,000, there would be a supplemental appropriation coming from the interest that is earned, that has been placed in our investment account this year. At this point, I think there's roughly $128,000 in interest that has been earned. So $100,000 of that would go to fund the schools in this current fiscal year, ending June 30th of 19. And then sometime after June 30th of this year, the school board will come back and ask us for another $100,000 to finish up some of the items, preferably, I guess, this summers when you want to have those items finished, I guess. And that would come, and you'll see this later on in the discussion tonight, from our excess of the unassigned fund balance. What you'll see momentarily from Ms. Spradlin is that there's roughly $1.5 million for the council to commit that to a fund, and instead of having $1.5 million committed to that fund, there would be $1.4 million committed to that fund. And this would be where the $200,000 would come from in order for us to get a start on fixing some of the issues at the school. And then in regards, I know the agenda says other long-term alternatives. The other long-term alternative, as we all know, is whether we renovate or whether we build. And in order to facilitate discussion amongst the school board and council, May 30th once again has been set for everyone for both boards to be together to talk and have a moderator involved as to how to move forward. And those things will be properly noticed so that there will not be any issues like we had last week.
Okay, other discussion?
Well, I'd just like to say I think this is a good step. I think if anyone read the articles on the front page of the paper Friday morning after our forum or Sunday morning, you could see that there's many steps to take. There's a lot of things that we need to do and a lot of things we need to figure out. So, I think we have a good idea of kind of separating some short-term needs and our long-term needs. We've been talking for a while, it seems like, about how we need to do things to improve school safety, and we need to have handicap accessible restrooms in our schools. So this is what some of this money is going to. And again, it's just a drop in the bucket, and it's just the first step of many steps. But overall, I'm optimistic about this council and the school board working together to try to figure out what the best thing is to do for the whole city going forward. So I'm excited that we'll be able to do some stuff right now, and you'll see by hopefully the first day of school next year, some of this stuff is done. I know it depends on architects and engineers and contractors, but hopefully we're pushing ahead and we can get some things done, and you can actually see some results in all our elementary schools, and all 4 of them.
I'm right there with you. I mean, we know the problems are big and widespread, and like I said in the article that we saw on Sunday, it's a good first step, but we do have to work over the next 6 or 8 months and try to figure out where we are, where we're going to be in the next year or two. We've got a few options, and I'd like to hear more about all the options and see which one works the best for us. But this 200,000 is a good first step. It shows a good faith effort from us, and we're trying to work with you all, and we're trying to do something good because, at the end of the day, it's about the kids, it's about their health, it's about their learning environment, it's about how they're going to learn, and I think we're doing a good first thing right here.
I would agree. I mean, as I think I told someone, up until now, I don't know that, at least in the time I've been on city council, that the school board has come and made a request for these kind of improvements. So to me, it's on us to do something, and we are making a very small step, at least in terms of ADA compliance, but it will help some. By no means, if you read Sunday's article, will it solve all the problems? And so we need to come together and try to figure out what that looks like long-term, what the options are, and what we can fund. But also, as a parent, it's good to know that there's measures being taken to make the schools safer. That makes me feel better as a parent, but and I'm sure it makes a lot of other parents feel better as well.
Well, I mean, we all know that the school system's no different than the city system. I mean, for decades, we went through without repairing, fixing, and doing what we should as a city. And up until this point, all I've heard is new school, new school, new school. Nobody's ever wanted to talk about, fixing what we've got and everything else. And the meetings that took place over the last 2 weeks, my input was not even requested, so I don't know all that's been said other than what the media has released. But I would love to be part of these conversations and see if there is an avenue that can get our schools back up to where they need to be, that's reasonable and responsible and achievable. And we need to work together with the school board. The school board needs to work together with us. And we all need to realize that we can't have everything we want. Nobody can get their way 100% of the time. Now, everybody has to be responsible with the funds that they're given in this city. I mean, the city has to be responsible for the taxpayers' money. The school board has to be responsible for the taxpayers' money. And we need to come up with a long-term plan that is going to see to it that the school board keeps up their buildings. It is not right to use those buildings up to the point to where they're no longer viable to put any more money in and keep them up. So we're going to have to talk about that. And I look forward to being at the table for that discussion, but everybody needs to realize the position that this city is in. Now, there is money that we can come up with and we can do things. Things should have been done last year, should have been done the year before and the year before that and a decade ago. But they never have been done for one reason or another. Well, now it's time to start doing it. But we all need to keep in mind that the school system is not the only entity in the city that has needs. We've got a DSS department that is in desperate need of a building. We've got other capital problems that needs to be addressed. So we cannot focus on one single issue because this council, this city leadership has to take care of the whole entire city needs, not just one department. But once again, I look forward to this conversation and wished we could have had it last week.
All right, well, I'll say I'm glad to see that the conversation has started. I think it takes a lot of tough, hard conversations to get past that and get to a positive conversation sometimes, but it looks like we're moving through the pasture a little bit anyway. We've stepped through a few little holes here and there, but at least we're starting to talk about the right things. What's interesting, I think, to me is we all know we've got to do something about the schools. It's unfortunate that we find ourselves in a time where we're very limited on the amount of financial resources we've got to do anything with the schools, but we're going to figure something out. I think it's interesting that everybody that I've talked to has come up with at least an option or two that nobody's even mentioned up to this point. So I think that's part of the conversation. I think we got to be very open-minded about what all the options are on the table. So this community needs to see every option, whether we think it's a good option, a good idea, or a bad idea. So I'm hopeful that when we look at the options, there'll be a laundry list of 10 or 15 options for what we could do with the schools. New consolidated schools, one option. 3-to-1's another option. 4-to-1's another option. Well, I've heard 2 or 3 others that are hybrids of even that. So everybody's got a good a view, I think, on how to think about it. So we've got to listen to everybody's perspective from each angle, and then figure out within the city's means of financial progress where we're going to put the money in the short term and where we're going to put the money in the long term, because it's going to have to be a short and a long-term plan. If we had enough money, it'd just be, we take care of it and we move on, but that's not the situation. So we do have a little money, and CFO's going to talk about it here in a little bit. We've done a pretty decent job of refinancing our debt and saving and cutting our costs, and so we're going to find ourselves with a couple $1 million here that we got to talk about, but we got debt service. Unfortunately, one of our priorities right now, which shouldn't be a priority, is debt service. So you should never have to talk about one of our priorities is paying the debt off, but it is. So we've got a little money. I said earlier in a few council meetings ago that I was hopeful we'd have maybe $1 million to put in a capital account for the school. So we could go fairly high with this, much higher than what you're seeing there. It's really dependent on us as a council of what we want to commit, I think, this year and next year, and what the priorities are. But there's money there. That's the good news. And public safety needs to be in that mix too, because we do have some pretty serious issues in public safety. But we'll figure out what's reasonable this year, and then we'll hopefully economy stays good. We'll take another positive step next year to do even more. So we got to continue to look at this complex problem and do what we know we can and do the right thing. And so I think I got one citizen wants to say one more thing about the school before we get off this.
Yes, I did sign up for this part of the discussion of the file. I didn't see public discussion, but to the board, Jackie Knopfler, 21 McCollum
Yes.
Circle. I did want to make mention of this one thing, that it's not what we do moving forward now, it's how we do it. I wouldn't want to hear of any more councilmen getting together and not acknowledging all the councilmen and letting them know about the meeting. You all cannot all meet at the same time. Everyone that's part of this city knows about that one sunshine rule. But when you go off and have these private meetings, and then you read about it, councilmen may read about it the next day in the newspaper, or the school board may read that their member was there the next day in the meeting. It causes these animosities and unnecessary feelings. So I appreciate what you all have said. The other thing is, with the $100,000, if it's to be said, that's to go to the safety, and the second $100,000 in 2020 is to go to the handicap accessibility. And to keep that in mind, that if that is true, that it will be after next year, it'll be 2021 before I am eligible to work in the elementary schools. That doesn't sit right with me. But at least we are moving forward and getting something done. How is the community, what is the assurance to the community that this money is going to actually go where it's said to be go, without being earmarked, allocated out, or whatever? We're going to hold them responsible, the school board responsible, and to Mr. Or Dr. Perriton's, to his credit, he wasn't here. He's only been here 2 years, but he is responsible for last year's budget and this year's budget as well, and the money that's going to be going towards these issues. What can the community take back out of here saying that the money actually is going to go where you're assigning it to go?
Okay, thank you. And I think Ms. Knopfler makes one good point. When you're in a problem like this, it's complex, it is a team effort. And so even though you might not want to hear the other side, you might disagree with it, you still got to hear it, because something good's going to come out of that discussion. At least you got to try to understand it, even though you might continue to disagree with it. But, so we've got to hear all sides, we got to go about this as a community together, and then, and see what this community wants to do as a whole, move forward to get our schools up to where they should be on ADA and safety, and then what are we going to do with a new school or a couple schools maybe going down the road. So we'll get there. We'll get there. It's not, the sun hasn't set, so we still got a full day to keep working the problem, and we'll get there. I promise you, we'll get there.
I think you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, a good point about how you said we were starting to take the steps, work through the problems, have the meetings, start the discussions. I think it's, since I've been here, I really do feel this way. I feel like, everyone I've spoke to up here on the school board, school administration, city administration, we all want what's best. And when I say what's best, I mean best for our kids, best for our parents, best for our teachers, best for our communities. And like you said, we've had some maybe bumps along the road, just trying to discuss and trying to all agree about the best way to get there. But I do think everyone's has the best interest at heart. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic. We're taking baby steps, but we're working on it.
And the comment that was made about the guaranteeing that the money's going to be there, this council can earmark that $200,000, that the school system cannot spend it on anything but what we deem it for. I am correct on that, am I not?
No,
I don't think so. That's where it's going to go. Once you appropriate the money, it's the school board's responsibility to spend it. I can assure you.
Well, Ms. Spradley, will you speak on that real quick?
Sure, I didn't want to interrupt Dr. Perigin, but we can appropriate these funds specifically to the local capital projects fund, not their general fund to be spent on general expenditures, but specifically local capital projects. And I think that is the intent.
and I want to clarify too, Ms. Knopflin, I don't know what's going to be fixed first with that $100,000. I don't know if that's going to go to the vestibules or to the ADA compliance issues. So that would be that's a school board decision on how they move forward with that. And as Ms. Spradlin said, we can, put that money towards the local capital projects, but what's fixed and the timeline it's fixed would be up to the school board.
Is the general plan, and if it's okay if I ask Dr. Perigin a question, the general plan for the first part coming out of this year's budget, which ends June 30th, to be for safety, creating vestibule areas which would be at the entrances to all 4 elementary schools. Our schools are safe, but we always want to try to work as hard as we can to make them as safe as possible, even more safe. So, so that'll sort of create a barrier. When you get buzzed in the main door, you'll be in a vestibule where you speak with someone at the office and you get buzzed in a second time before you actually can get into the hallways where kids are. And then the other part, the other $100,000 for fiscal year 20, it's after July 1st of this year. So that would be for remodeling, renovating bathrooms in all 4 elementary schools, at least 1 each, boys and girls, to be handicap accessible. So that would come after July 1st. But technically, we could actually see the vestibules and the bathrooms, depending on, again, contractors,
Sure.
engineers, architects, all that being done over this summer break, possibly?
So the hope is, Mr. Farnham, that both of those projects are complete over the summer and before school starts again. I guess we have a really early August start, so we've got a lot of work ahead of us to do. Really, the order of which of those 2 projects happen, or it may be that we start at one school then move to another, it'll really depend on architects, RFP processes, contractors being available. But the idea is, we know through the estimates already that we can do 3 vestibules for around $100,000. We already have that estimate. We don't know what the estimate for doing 1 male and 1 female restroom at each of those 3 schools will cost. We know that the estimate was $300,000 for every restroom at all 3 of those schools. Anyway, we'll have to wait and see what the architect says. And then as far as Van Pelt goes, we're continuing with our current capital improvement plan, and we'll be doing the vestibule ourselves out of money that's already in our capital improvement account. And we'll be adding a vestibule at Van Pelt Elementary School as well. So that's the plan. The order is not known yet. We'll be waiting on architects to, and then after the architects get their information together, then we have to do an RFP. The architect will have to do an RFP, so we'll have to wait for RFPs. And so really both projects are on slate for this summer. That's our plan. The order there's a lot of variables.
I just want to say I appreciate you, Dr. Perigin, for the work you've put into working with us, working with the school board to try to figure out what can we do now, because we can talk about doing things as much as possible, but I'm excited that we'll actually see stuff being done this summer. And while these are short-term needs, we talked about our short-term and our long-term, we're also still looking at our long-term goals, strategies, plan to move forward. So I'm optimistic and look forward to working with you. I think we all do.
I appreciate that. And I think part of the rationale for doing the vestibules is, our philosophy on school safety is that as many barriers as we can put between our kids and the bad guys as possible. That's what we want to try to do. And a vestibule is certainly another barrier that, from that part of school safety. Obviously, there's many different parts of school safety that don't deal with intruders, that could deal with, bus lanes and car lanes and trip hazards and all that kind of stuff. So this is a step in the right direction, but one that we can fix quickly that'll have a big impact. And then, of course, getting one male and one female restroom at each school will be a start, but it doesn't get us all the way there because we have multiple levels at those schools. So, we'll still have some work to do. I will add as well, Ms. Knopflin, I think earlier mentioned some grants. You're aware, I'm sure, that we have a grant with the CDBG to replace the elevator at Stonewall Jackson. And so that could be something that we get knocked off the list pretty quickly as soon as we know the results of that grant application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other discussion? All right. On to item 6, consider first reading of FY 2019-2020 budget ordinance. Staff report.
Council, tonight is the first reading of the budget ordinance, and over the spring we have had many meetings in regards to how this council wants to see this year's budget. It appears that there's, I'll tell you what the needs have been that have come from council that I believe there's a consensus on. First, I will say the additional Commonwealth attorney, that is a local requirement that was not talked about in council, that was part of a state law that was passed. It was passed with the budget here late April, early May, which requires us to fund an additional Commonwealth attorney due to the fact that our police officers do wear body-worn cameras. So that'll come to a total cost of the city of $69,000. The other consensus that I heard throughout the budget meetings was Discover Bristol should have an increase in their budget of $25,000, and that the Birthplace of Country Music would have a $5,000 increase from last year's budget when they did not receive any funding from the city. So that'd be a total of $69,000. So then the question becomes, where does that money come from? And so in order to make these funding scenarios happy, in our debt reserve fund that's currently budgeted as presented, there was $1,033,637 in that line item. $33,637 would come from that line item, which would make it an even $1 million that would go into debt reserve. There was also a building maintenance fund that was set up. That was $25,000. That would now come out and go to fund those changes. And then there would be a reduction in my city manager contingency fund of $40,363, which gets you the $99,000. That's it.
Okay. Public comment. We've got Nancy Marney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, my name is Nancy Marney. I'm a resident of the city of Bristol, Virginia. I'm a property owner. By law, every year, this city is required to make payments in the term of millions of dollars for the bonds we owe. Every year, the law requires us to make payments for the bonds we owe, millions of dollars. Now, in addition to this, we not only have to have the millions of dollars for the bond payments, we have to have an economic inflow in order to run the city. Now, there are variables involved in this. The income coming into the city is very vulnerable. And some of this vulnerability we cannot control. We may get it, but we can't control it. Now, I think that it is imperative that this council put $1 million a year or more into a reserve fund. Now, there are things that could happen right this minute, right tomorrow, that would require this city to get into its income reserve. For instance, if the U.S. government economy tanks, we're going to go belly up quickly if we don't have some money in the bank. This city will go belly up. Now, as far as saying we're in good shape, put that in proper context. We are in fairly good shape as compared to 1 year ago today. But if you put this in total context, we're in a disastrous situation. We are 1/2 step away from utter chaos. That's where we are, folks. Don't be fooled by some of this rhetoric. I'm ready to pull my hair out already from what I've heard up to this point. I'm ready to go home. I've heard all this crap for so long, and you all are being yanked around and played fools. That's what you're being. That's my opinion. Now, the city has got to have access to an income because our income is vulnerable. And if we reach a point where we don't have the money we need, we are in big time trouble. Now, there have been some good suggestions along the way and some nice thoughts from people about, well, we could do this and that and the other thing. Now, folks, put this in context. If we were a city with no debt, or a very little bit of debt, or a city with an enormous income every year, we could add some of the niceties. Please don't hold me to that.
Hurry.
We could add some of the niceties that are being mentioned, but we are not that city. We are a city overwhelmed with debt. We're a poor city. We're an old city. We don't have enough money. We're barely keeping our nose above the water. That's who we are. Do not be deluded, folks.
Thank you.
All right, if you're not going to give me time, I'm leaving.
All right, what's the pleasure, council?
I'm going to make a motion that we move to first reading. I'm going to make a motion that we move to first reading with the changes as presented by the city manager. By caption only.
I second that.
Okay, your motion, Mr. Osborne, second, Mr. Farnum. Any discussion?
Yeah, I'm glad that he left that up there. Right here's a prime example of why we don't maintain our buildings. We're taking $25,000 out of building maintenance funds. It's always something. This city financially is in better shape than it's been in a long time. Everybody's starting to breathe a little bit better, seeing clear skies. And then we get a budget presented to us this year that, I mean, as soon as you get a little extra money, it's allocated for something else. Where if we had rainy day funds set aside, or we managed our money a little bit better than what we currently are, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight being asked to pull $25,000 away from maintenance on our buildings. That line item would say pulling that out of this account or that account. So we still got a long ways to go as a city with our finances. That line item right there, pulling $25,000 out of building maintenance, should not be there, people. We can do better than that. But unfortunately, this budget year, we're not going to do better than that.
Other discussion? All right, well, I'll just say it's pretty unfortunate when you got Miss Marnie leaving city council chambers. The one person that's been in this chamber her entire life, the only one that's really cared about this city has been sitting right there trying to tell this council, you need to pay attention, because she has seen every bad decision made. And we're trying to warn this council, and she's now given up on this council. That's why she walked out. That we are not in a green pasture. We are absolutely walking on eggshells. The economy turns down every 10 to 12 years, like I said. It happens like clockwork. And we are not in a position to absorb that. We're not. And for us to be increasing our head count and increasing our expenses on the expenditure line, we should be going back to 2017. We should be 5% below 2017, right? Our revenue's up a little bit, but our expenditures are going way faster than the revenues. That is not the way you manage a city that's in the debt position that we're in. That's not the way you do it. I don't know why we think that we're in a position to where we can do this, because we're not. And if we get lucky and we slide through this because the economy stays good, then it'll just be because we're lucky. Because if it goes south, you guys are going to remember this discussion. Because then you're going to decide, then you're going to have the really tough decisions to do. Then you're going to be cutting staffing tremendously in all departments, more than we've even had to do up to this point, right? So there's a lot wrong with this budget. The trash collection fees went up on citizens and businesses, but didn't go up on the other people bringing trash into this city. That's not right. Head count's up from where it should have been. I mean, there's just so much wrong with this budget. So, yeah, I'm a no vote. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a no vote today. I'm a no vote tomorrow, because I want to make sure this city gets out of this financial position. And we are not out of it yet. And I don't understand why we don't understand that. This city is only 17,000 people, and it's been going south on population for 20 years. We were 19.5, and now we're below 17.
We're below.
What if we wake up and it's 15 in 5 years from now? Then what are we going to do? What are we going to do when it's 12? See, we got to manage for what we're seeing here, not for what we hope it happens or what we want it to be. We got to pay attention to the numbers, right? Because that's the reality. That's what's going to come back and start raining down on you, is the reality of the situation, right? So, yep, we're going to continue to have this discussion, and I'm going to get more loud and more reminding of this council's decision to pass this budget. When things go south, you're going to hear it. And I hope this community gets up here and starts really getting involved, because I really don't know what's happened from 2 years ago to today. I really don't. I don't understand why we think now we're all of a sudden in a place to where we can do this. It just doesn't make sense. You would never do this if this was your business, so why are you doing it here? If it was cash coming out of your pocket that you had to cash flow your business to survive next quarter, you would not make the decisions we're making. You would not do that. So I just don't get it. Any other discussion? All right, with that said, call the roll.
Farnum.
Yes.
Hartley.
Yes.
Osborne.
Absolutely, yes.
Wingard.
Absolutely no.
Mumpower.
100% 50, absolutely no. Reading the ordinance by caption only.
Budget ordinance for fiscal year 1920, making general fund, community development, block grant fund, solid waste disposal enterprise fund, capital project fund, asset forfeiture fund, transit enterprise fund, school operating fund, school textbook fund, school food service fund, school construction capital projects fund, and school local capital projects fund appropriations for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2020 in the following amounts. General fund, $53,930,744. Community Development Block Grant Fund, $529,935. Solid Waste Disposal Enterprise Fund, $7,889,222. Capital Project Fund, $9,171,588. Transit Enterprise Fund, $468,607. Asset Forfeiture Fund, $102,000. School Operating Fund, $28,228,491. School Textbook Fund, $924,561. School Food Service Fund, $2,003,400. School Construction Capital Projects Fund, $116,496. School Local Capital Projects Fund, $792,944. And regulating payments out of the city treasury and also fixing the tax rate on real and personal property for fiscal year 2020.
All right, item 7, consider approval of offer received for Elbert Street. Staff report.
Council, Ms. Beth Reinhardt has, property. This is the property that we mentioned earlier on Elbert Way. We do have a proposed contract of $15,000 for those 2 lots, and it has been properly advertised. We've had the public hearing, and now I'm asking for council to consider the contract at this time.
Okay, no one's signed up for public comment. Need a motion second.
Move to approve.
All right, motion approved.
Second.
Second, Mr. Farnum. Any discussion?
Council, is it council discussion?
Mhm.
All right, my questions are, what is the tax assessment on these 2 pieces of property?
I can get that for you. One lot is tax assessed at $32,500. The other lot is tax assessed at $32,500 as well.
Okay. So that's $65,000 in tax assessment. Okay.
That's fine.
And the offer came in at $15,000, which was full asking price. So now my question is, who set the price on that piece of property?
Council, this price was set. We hired a real estate agent to set prices based on what he thought the lots would sell for. What you have is a lot that is 0.3 of an acre, another lot is 0.2 of an acre. You know, a tax assessment doesn't necessarily mean that's what the property's worth. The property's only worth what someone's willing to give. And the real estate agent set the price based on what he thought those lots were worth, and we were the offer was full asking price.
Okay, so this is Exit 5, one of our major developments that's going on. Lots are selling up there at the falls for $400,000 and $500,000 a piece. Lots are selling around that area. Offers on houses has been in the $500,000 for lots and houses, only to find out that there's restrictions on the deeds. So here we've got this same general vicinity that has a total of a half-acre lot that's tax assessed at $65,000 that somebody actually thought it was only worth $15,000. That's amazing.
How long has it been
These
listed?
lots are worth twice minimum if not 3 times what has been offered for a quick sale at an auction. And these were actually listed and advertised with a sign in them. That's just, to me, that's unacceptable.
How long has it been listed?
These properties have been listed probably 6 weeks.
This is the only offer we've received on them so far, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Well, it's of my opinion, we have to take this offer. It's a full asking price. But whoever valued these properties dropped the ball big time. And we need to go back and we need to relook at every city property that we have for sale and make sure that this doesn't happen again. Because these are sold way, way under market value. We need to sell our land. We need to get it in a taxpayer's possession. But we don't need to give it away.
Well, the only thing I would say is lots are selling at Clear Creek for $17,000, $19,000 is what we recently sold lots at Clear Creek for.
That's
all.
residential only. This is commercial.
But this is a residential neighborhood where this is located.
That borders, everything it borders is commercial.
And I understand that.
Across the street is residential.
I understand that, but I think this is more of a residential area than it is commercial based on the location where it's located there at that neighborhood.
I don't understand how you come up with that because it borders commercial and it's divided by a street before you get to residential.
That was going to be my question, is how's that zoned?
I don't know the zoning off the top of my head.
Because there's
Let's see if
commercial
I can get it.
on one side of the street as you go in, but then there's residential.
Well, right there you got Ferguson's and then you've got whatever that other business is right there. I mean, everything on this side of that street where that circle is commercial. Everything on the other side of the street is residential.
I would say, and just full disclosure, I'm a real estate agent. I'm a real estate license. I'm not the city's real estate agent, but I've searched online on the Realtor MLS systems, and I think in Bristol, Virginia, and in the greater Washington County area, there's about 500 lots for sale at any given point in time. Some of them have been on the market for years. I would say, don't look at what the tax assessment is. I've seen some houses sell that were tax assessed at $300,000 that have sold for $600,000, and vice versa. So sometimes I think the tax assessment can be a little misleading, I think. But just to throw it out there as a comparable, I bought a piece of land last year that was for $1,000 that was bigger than this piece of land. So to sell that for that piece right there, I don't know if that's in a flood zone. I think there's a little creek that goes right there. I'd have to look at the FEMA site to see if it's in an actual FEMA flood zone, but I'm not sure who's buying it, but for the city to sell it, I'd say that's a fair price.
That's in a B3 zone.
B3. Wow. All right, well, Mr. Eads, I'm going to recommend we take a look at these lots one more time and make sure that they're priced accordingly.
Well, I can't tell by exactly where this map line is. Actually, I think that's going to be an R2 zone is where that's located, because it appears to be B3 incorporates the building there next to the yellow line, but it doesn't go beyond that, at least from this zoning map. It doesn't appear that it does, so it looks to me like it's R2.
So we'll make $15,000 selling this piece of land. And is it also true if the tax assessment is $65,000, we'll also make $760.50 a year in real estate taxes every year going forward, unless it's developed and they would change?
Correct.
And I will say this, Mr. Eads, you made the comment that just because it's tax assessed doesn't mean that's its value. But everybody that's ever come down here to dispute their taxes because they think it's too high, I promise you they're being told, no, that's what their property's worth.
I'm not saying that, but when you're dealing with open market property, it's completely different than when you're dealing with a tax assessment.
I mean, it's either worth it or it's not.
We'll save that discussion for later. But.
And isn't it kind of tough because whenever the tax assessment is done, whenever a company, it's an outside company that comes in that looks at all the property and tells you what your new tax assessment's gonna be for the next 2 or 3 years. That's not done by local
That's not
folks.
done by anyone that's local, and I can tell you that if the city was being charged taxes on that property, and I knew that we were going to be paying taxes on $65,000 on those 2 lots, I would be arguing that those lots are not worth $65,000.
I don't think they're worth $65,000.
I mean, we hired a real estate professional to go out, value the property. That's what he said it's worth, and you know, I'll be more than happy to go back out and talk to him again, but he says if that's what it's worth, then he's the expert, he's the one that's done the research. I have to somewhat defer to his expertise.
Was the commission rate set for the real estate agent?
6%.
I thought it was 5.
It is 5 on the contract.
So the legalities now, if council wasn't to approve this,
You don't have to approve it.
there, you can get out of the
It's
purchase
just been an
contract.
offer. There's no contract's been signed.
Well, how do you say no to a full asking?
You just say no.
Well, I'm not willing to say no because it's our mistake. This guy just happened to get, that was his lucky day that he found that. But we need to make sure that we don't have any more like that sitting out in the city.
Well, you may hold it against me for what I'm getting ready to say, but maybe you should take a look at the list and price it and tell us what you think it's
I
worth.
can't do that.
You know, because there comes a point, I can't make everybody, I mean, if someone thinks that the property's worth X amount, then, I mean, that may be your opinion. You know, I mean, I really don't know what you want me to tell the real estate agent. He's the one that's.
When the real estate agent came and said, we're gonna put a price out there of 15,000, did anybody ask, how'd you come up with 15?
He looks at comps, just like Mr. Farnham looks at comps.
There's 400 or 500 lots for sale right now. Some of them are certain neighborhoods that are 15,000, 20,000. Some neighborhoods I've seen lots for sale for $125,000. That's in the Virginian, which is in the county. But so I mean, there's a big range for lots, and again, I know one that sold. I know it pretty well. That sold last year for $1,000, a piece that was bigger than that. So I really don't think the city made a mistake. I feel like, and again, it's only worth what someone will pay for it. And I think if you ask 5 real estate agents, you might get 5 different prices about what it's worth.
Well, my
Mr.
question
Farnham,
was
you know
this, the real estate agent should have come with, how they came with 15, they should have come with 3 comparable properties similar that sold, you know, in that area over the last whatever, to say that's how I came up with 15. But then it is incumbent upon the city, when you say, well, it's tax assessed at 65, you came with 15, the comps say whatever, what's the problem here, and challenge the real estate agent to how we're so far out of whack as a city tax assessing it, to maybe the comps were a mistake. No, wait a minute. I mean, I've seen comps be a mistake. You know, you look at comps sometimes. You look at 3 comps. One sold at an estate auction, and it was a rainy day, and nobody showed up, and some guy got it for $8,000. So that happens. So you gotta kind of look at it in detail and say what's causing this dilemma here, and maybe our tax assessment's wrong.
You know, back to your point in regards to, you know, a lot being tax assessed high, then being sold for low. I mean, we've done that at the Clear Creek now for I don't know how long. I mean, those lots are tax assessed at $40,000, but we're selling them for $18,000 and $19,000. And you know, that discussion was never brought up that we're selling it too cheap at Clear Creek.
And how many people are beating down the door to buy those lots at $18,000?
Right. I mean, even the lots right now are priced at Clear Creek at $19,900, and they're still not selling.
But you're talking apples and oranges. This is exit 5. You won't find another half-acre lot for $15,000 anywhere within I'm not going to say half, within a quarter of a mile circle of that lot right there, exit 5. You won't find a half-acre nowhere for $15,000.
I don't think you'll find a true commercial
Location
half-acre.
is
I agree
everything.
with that. I agree with that.
Location is everything. We dropped the ball on this one. I'm just requesting we have somebody put more eyes on it or look at it again and make sure we don't have anything else like that out there.
I'm going to ask you if you want to come down and meet with me and Mr. Carter about it. We'll be more than happy to go over it. But I mean, I went through it with Mr. Carter. We went through the list, and based on my knowledge of what real estate properties are worth, and this is, you know, I can't say that it's worth much more than 15. I wouldn't have paid 15 for it.
I'm trying to pull up the FEMA, I know we really don't do this, but I was gonna try to pull up the FEMA flood map and see, because there's a little creek there. If it's in a FEMA flood zone, I'd say that lot is worth nothing. If it's in a flood zone.
We haven't accepted it yet, don't say that.
Well, if it is, it shouldn't have a tax assessment at $65,000. That's part of my point. If it's worth $65,000 for this local government to look at that owner and say, it's worth $65,000, you're gonna pay this tax ticket, then we have a problem somewhere. It's either worth it or close to it.
As Mr. Farnham says, it's set by individuals who are not associated with the city. They come in once every 4 years, they review the properties that have been sold, they go out, they look at certain properties, other properties they don't even look at. It's just based on data that they have internally and that they get from the city. I mean, the appraiser may have never even laid eyes on those lots.
Can I ask you a question? So before I was on here, I remember there was a discussion, maybe with Mr. Wingard and Doug Fleener and Archie, about selling off a lot of city properties, right? So how many properties do we have listed right now, if you had to guess? Because I know it's a bunch.
If I had to guess, I'd say no less than 30.
You know, they're all listed with the same realtor, and I'm assuming they're a combination of vacant lots, houses
Most
like the
of
one
them
we
are
sold
vacant
across the
lots.
street.
I don't even know if we have any properties that we own that are homes. I think most of it's vacant property.
And if they are houses, they're like the one we sold recently over here.
Right, and then I think the only, the one building that I can think of off the top of my head is the former school board office. That's listed right now. That's the only one that I can think that has a building on it.
All right, any other discussion? All right, please call the roll.
Farnum.
Yes.
Hartley.
Yes.
Osborne.
Yes.
Wingard.
Yes.
Mumpower.
Yes. All right, item A, consider appointment to Virginia Highlands Community College Board. Staff report.
Council, this is an appointment for Miss Beth Reinhardt to be reappointed to the Virginia Highlands Community College Board. She was appointed, I believe, last year or year before, to fill a term, and now it's time for the full term reappointment, and the community college has requested that she be reappointed.
Have a motion?
I'd make a motion, we reappoint Beth Reinhardt to the Virginia Highlands Community College Board.
Okay.
I'll second.
A motion, Mr. Osborne, second, Mr. Hartley. Please call the roll.
Farnum.
Yes.
Hartley.
Yes.
Osborne.
Yes.
Wingard.
Yes.
Mumpower.
Yes. All right, item 9, quarterly financial update.
Mayor and members of council, this is the finance update as of March 31st, 2019. We will be discussing the revenues and expenditures for the third quarter of fiscal year 2019, the cash balance and the unassigned fund balance. This data is prepared on the cash basis and is unaudited data.
Try the other.
Can you give her some training on the overhead projector?
Please. Okay, the general fund summary, with a budget of $53.6 million, revenues are $39.2 million, expenditures at $37.1 million, for a surplus of $2.1 million. For the third quarter, if all items were received and expended evenly, the benchmark would be 75%. Revenues are at 73%, expenditures are at 69%. The solid waste disposal fund summary, with a budget of $5.6 million, revenues are $4.6 million, expenditures are $3.9 million, for a fund surplus at March 31st of $668,000. This surplus does include the general fund transfer of $567,000. Capital projects fund summary, with a budget of $12.5 million, revenues are at $6 million, expenditures at $5.2 million, for a surplus of right around $800,000. This fund holds the balance of the unexpended 2016 general obligation bond funds of just over $1 million and had a state receivable of $500,000. Here's the general fund revenue summary. Of the $39.2 million received by the general fund, 25.3 is revenue from local sources, 10.9 is revenue from state sources, 2.9 is revenue from federal government, and $55,000 is other financing sources. The general fund expenditure summary. I'm going to go over the actual column, what makes up the $37.1 million of general fund expenditures. Government administration is $1.9 million. Judicial administration is $1.1 million. Public safety is $10.1 million. Public works, $3.2 million. Health, welfare, and social services, $5.8 million. Education, $5.3 million. Parks, recreation, and cultural, almost $2 million. Community development, $1.1 million. Non-departmental, which for this fiscal year includes transit. If you'll remember, in the fiscal year 20 budget, we put transit in its own fund. Non-departmental, $948,000. Debt of $2.8 million, and transfers of $2.5 million. In the percentage spent column, all major categories are below that 75% benchmark, with the exception of education and transfers. With education, for the schools, the non-SOQ state funding or incentive funding is slower coming in at the beginning of the fiscal year. So typically the schools need more local dollars up front in a fiscal year. This evens out over the last 2 quarters of the fiscal year. The transfer percentage is above the benchmark. As of March 31st, the entire transfer to solid waste, as I mentioned earlier, $567,000, and the $301,000 general fund transfer was made to capital projects. That's why that is above the 75%. This is what our general fund revenue looks like. The blue is our local revenue at 65% of general fund revenues received. Local revenues make up 65% of the fiscal year 19 general fund budget. The red is our state revenue at 28% of general fund revenues received, and state revenues make up 28% of the general fund budget. The green is our federal revenue at 7%, and federal revenues actually make up 7% of the general fund budget. And other financing sources is less than 1%, so small you can't even see on this graph. So our revenues for fiscal year 19 are right in line with our budget. This is what our general fund expenditures look like. Simply put, this is how the city's money is spent. Public safety is the largest percentage at 27% of general fund expenditures. Health, welfare, and social services is at 15%. Education at 14%. Public works is at 8%. Debt is 7.5%. Transfers are 6%, 6.8%. Parks, rec, and cultural is 5.35%. Government administration is just a little over 5%. Community development is 3%. Judicial administration is at 3%, and non-departmental is at 2.5%. That's what our general fund looks like on the expenditure side. The general fund revenue report. Keep in mind, if all revenues were received evenly, the percentage would be 75%. General property taxes are at 65% of the budgeted amount, which is not unusual for the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, with the June 5th real property tax date approaching. Other local taxes are at 80%. Permits and privilege fees are at 67%. We have reduced this amount in the fiscal year 20 budget to move closer to actual. Fines and forfeitures are at 104% due to the traffic program. Revenue from the use of money and property is at 186%. This is due to the interest earnings that the city's money has earned and a significant rent item that was received early in the fiscal year. Charges for services is at 55%. The ambulance revenue, which was new for fiscal year 19, was slow coming in the beginning, but it is beginning to pick up, and come in evenly. And also keep in mind that Clear Creek and Sugar Hollow typically pick up in the spring and summer months. Miscellaneous revenue is at 78%. Recovered costs are at 110%, and that's typically because we budget recovered costs for the most part as we receive them. State revenue is at 74%, federal revenue is at 73%, and other financing sources, as mentioned earlier, is at 81.9%. The target revenue report. You see here the 18-19 budget, 18-19 actual, the target for March, and then the year-to-date target variance. You can see that local sales and use tax has a positive budget variance of $370,000. Consumer utility tax and tax on wheels have slight positive budget variances. The cigarette tax has a positive budget variance of $30,000. The lodging tax has a positive budget variance of $61,000. And the meals tax has a positive budget variance of $34,000. The electric consumption, admission, and communication taxes have slight budget variances we will continue to monitor monthly. We did reduce the communications tax in the fiscal year 20 budget because actual was trending below budget. The financial data graphs. These graphs contain data for fiscal year 15, 16, 17, 18, and the current year, fiscal year 19, is shown in red. Local sales and use tax, you can see we are up through March 31st from all prior years, just slightly up from fiscal year 16, but still up. Consumer utility taxes are holding steady. The cigarette taxes are up for the period. The lodging taxes are up as well for the period. Meal taxes are up from 17 and 18, but down, still down from 15 and 16. And this graph actually shows our revenue as it comes in monthly. The blue line is a 3-year average by month of revenues received for fiscal year 16, 17, and 18. So the blue is the historical average, and the current year data is shown in orange. This allows us to compare where we are in the current year to historical data. And this is what our local sales tax looks like as it comes in for the year. I will just share with council, it always surprises me or amazes me that these curves hold. You can see the dip there in the month of March. Our local sales tax runs 2 months behind. So monies that are recorded in March were actually for January, which is after Christmas, and typically that is down. Here is what the lodging taxes look like as they are received by the city, and we're following the same curve as prior year. The mayor has spoken many times about evening, keeping that dip out of that curve. So we provide this data to CVB after it's presented to either the Finance Committee or Council for them to look at as well. Here's our meals tax revenue as it comes in. Our solid waste disposal fund summary. Once again, revenues of 4.6, expenditures of 3.9. For that surplus of 668,000, comprised mostly of the transfer from the general fund. Our disposal revenues are at 82% of budget. Collection revenues are at 79%. Disposal expenditures are at 64% of budget. Collection expenditures are at 66%. Debt expenditures, most of the debt has been paid by March 31st for solid waste at 99% year to date. Keep in mind that debt payments total 30% of the solid waste budget. And just as a reminder, the city has right under $500,000 in bond proceeds from the November 2016 bond issue, and these are budgeted in fiscal year 20 to be spent toward the cost of that liner. Falls update for phases 2 and 3. So this is the falls update for the third quarter of fiscal year 19. This is for phases 2 and 3. Phase 1 is 100% exclusively to fund the IDA revenue bonds. So as that money is received, it is immediately transferred to the IDA. You can see the 18-19 budget information in the first column, and the year-to-date as of March 31st with percentage of the budget. So as of March 31st, we've collected $496,000 in revenue. Related debt paid out is $1.8 million. Revenue sharing payments of $175,000 were paid out as of March 31st for a deficit for the year of 1.4, almost 1.5 million. Here is the cash balance, tax anticipation note information. The current TAN expired December 31st, 2018 and will not be renewed. In the fiscal year 20 budget ordinance, the TAN is not listed. This is the first time in many years that the city has not had the TAN allowed for in the budget appropriation ordinance. The cash balance at March 31st was $16 million, and the city has earned over $127,000 for this fiscal year in interest. For perspective, the cash balance a year ago, March 31st, 2018, was $9.9 million. 2 years ago, March 31st, 2017, the cash balance was $5.9 million. So you can see here, the city plan to build up cash to reduce the reliance on the TAN has been successful. So the cash balance detail at March 31st. Keep in mind, we pool city cash, meaning that the general fund, the solid waste, and the capital projects fund use the same bank account. So the cash balance at March 31st is $16 million. $844,000 of that is savings realized in 17-18 from the debt refinance. $532,000 of that is debt saving realized in the current fiscal year for the debt refinance. These funds will be expended in future years. $240,000 of that was for the 17-18 liner accrual. $112,000 of that is for the liner accrual for 18-19. $1 million is budgeted in the current fiscal year in the general fund, not to be expended, but in an account called the debt reserve. Not a true debt reserve, but in that account, not to be expended. And $300,000 is in the fiscal year 20 budget to help pay the cost of the liner, leaving a cash balance of a little over $13 million. Keep in mind, the city's fund balance policy is approximately $11 million. We do not need to keep $11 million in the bank year-round, but we do need to have that amount in the bank at June 30th. July 2019 debt payments total $2.1 million and will be paid out of the June 30th cash balance. And here is the unassigned fund balance calculation per the fund balance policy and our June 30th, 2018 audited financial statements. The unassigned fund balance at June 30th, 2018 was $14.1 million, and that is per the audit. The unassigned fund balance policy is 18%, or right at $10.5 million. So the city had approximately $3.6 million above the policy amount the last fiscal year audit. If you back out the debt restructure funds and capital carryover funds and general fund carryover funds, that leaves an excess over policy of $1.8 million. This information was presented to the Finance Committee, and the recommendation of the committee per our fund balance policy is to commit these funds to a reserve account. $1.5 million of the $1.8 is the recommendation. So what is the difference between unassigned fund balance and committed fund balance? Unassigned fund balance is comprised of liquid cash to meet cyclical cash flow needs. Committed fund balance contains amounts designated for a specific purpose or that have constraints placed on these resources. It's very important to note that committed fund balances require council action to commit those funds, and it requires council action to release those funds. It's the recommendation of the Finance Committee that $1.5 million be committed from the fiscal year unassigned fund balance, and that $1 million be committed from the current year fiscal year 19 budget for a true debt reserve account, for a total of $2.5 million of total funds committed. Also keep in mind that, as I've mentioned before, those debt savings we had from the fiscal year 18 refinance, after this fiscal year and what's taken into account fiscal year 20, there will be an additional $794,000 savings from 2018 debt refinance that already exist. They're already sitting in unassigned fund balance. Those will be expended in fiscal year 21. So council has some options as to how specifically you would like to commit these funds and what action of council will release these funds. The fund balance policy, a hard copy I believe is in front of you. These funds can be committed to a general reserve and to the debt reserve specifically. Also, council can commit these funds to be released by a simple majority of council or by a supermajority. The policy specifically allows for that. So after council discussion, we plan to present a motion to commit these funds once we know how you desire to move forward with this. I do think it's important that these funds be committed and taken out of unassigned fund balance before June 30th. Council, that concludes the presentation of the third quarter financial data. Thank you.
So at this point, you wanted us to talk about the 2.5 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and open up the discussion for the excess funds. The CFO wants us to talk about how to commit those funds. I think I heard the recommendation. Go ahead and repeat again so everybody's on the same page of $1 million for debt reserve, I think you said.
Yes, sir. It was $1 million from the current year budget, and to go ahead and commit those monies to a debt service budget reserve. We've not had that before. It's typically been budgeted in the general fund, but before 6/30/18, before June 30th of 18, really it was trying to build up the cash balance to get off the reliance of the TAN. So we made the fund balance goal early, so now we have some options. So the recommendation was, that was a long answer, Mayor, I'm sorry, but it was to put $1 million from the fiscal year 19 budget, commit those monies into a debt service budget reserve.
So the 2.5, you recommend $1 million go to debt reserve, and then we've got to talk about the
Yes,
other
sir.
$1.5 million.
1.5.
Okay, but 100,000 of that is being given to the school system.
That was the discussion earlier, yes, sir.
Okay, so we're actually at 1.4. Okay.
You've got 1.5 right now. You'd have, in July, we would move that 100,000 out of that 1.5, which would make it 1.4.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So has the city manager and the city staff looked at the public safety and the capital needs that are what we'll call, not very promising for a life of 2 years, and we need to really think about the monies that we would need to maybe for an emergency to have in case something happens to equipment?
In our capital projects plan that's been presented over the spring on several occasions, we have funds set aside to deal with, one, the capital projects that we need at the moment, and then two, if you want to set aside a rainy day fund. I'm assuming you're talking about maybe a roof blowing off, or as far as an emergency like that, is that kind of what you're talking about, or?
Well, if you had a major failure of a big fire truck, or you had a major failure of 3 police cars, and you had to have some cash to do something, or a school building roof fell in, or whatever, you had something happen and you weren't expecting it, you didn't have it in the budget, wasn't planned.
Go ahead, Tim.
If you disagree with what I'm saying, you correct me. I believe that the city manager and I are in agreement that we should commit these funds in a broad basis at this point till we reach a sustainable amount, whether that stays 1.5 million or builds to 2 million, and not identify it for a specific purpose, because the city is so close to its legal debt margin that we're very limited as to what our options are. And I believe that thought is consistent with how our fund balance policy reads.
So a general commitment, so not
Yes, sir.
capital, not public safety, not schools, just a general commitment of the total amount.
Yes, sir.
And then decide at some point, once we know more information of how to divvy the money out, that's what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, I think some of the discussion, and I've said this, is when we started this, the goal was to set the money aside, and it got, I think, transferred to reserve, or which probably wasn't the right way to phrase that, because it's really to build up the unassigned fund balance to get us off the TANs. And we've done that much quicker than the original plan was, which is good. As you pointed out, you know, going forward, it's not even in the budget ordinance, so that's a good step. But we don't need that money sitting there just in that unassigned fund. You know, I use the term, and different people have things, but I guess to me it's like a rainy day fund, you know, that it's there. You know, the unassigned fund balance, we shouldn't ever have to go back and touch that, because that's for cash flow to keep us off the TAN. Now, what's the next step? And so that bucket's full, so the water flows over into the next bucket, which is this rainy day fund, which gives us, for these unforeseen emergencies that I could think of probably 4 or 5 that, you know, I hope don't come to pass. But the thing is, there's 4 or 5 that I don't know what would be, that are probably more likely to come to pass. So it's committed out of the unassigned fund balance, but it's there for any of these needs, and not specifically necessarily capital, but or capital for schools or capital for police. And I think once that gets to a manageable level, then you can start, in my thinking, you can start really diving down. The other thing I like, though, is you know, setting $1 million specifically for debt, knowing that we've got that coming up, and you know, taking the money this year that is transferred to reserve and saying we're going to put that to that, because then that gives us you know, some margin there going forward to make sure that we can make those payments, and give us a little time for some things to develop at the falls and other places. So that would be how I'd kind of, and I think that's the way the general discussion in the Finance Committee went.
I think it's important to note, setting aside, committing, not just setting aside, but actual council commitment of that 1 million to a debt service budget reserve gets us on our current debt restructure plan through fiscal year 23. And based on how the debt works out between the general fund and solid waste disposal fund, maybe into 24. So that does give the project just a little bit more time to develop.
So would you go back to that slide just real quick, the one that you had the difference between the tax revenues and the debt of the, no, keep going.
Stop me when I get there.
Keep going. No, it was, you're showing a delta of 1.8 million, where you're showing the revenues coming in on DR 2 and 3. I don't know. Yeah.
Right there. No?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. So is that your overall concern right there, is we got a delta of 1.48 million and we're not covering.
Well, what happens, per the debt schedules that I think council has seen multiple times, is it spikes. And we have a plan that gets us through now, reserving that $1 million from 18-19 current fiscal year gets us through, gets us further into the life of the project and gives it just a little bit more time to develop.
So if you read this right, so year-to-date 331, we're at 496, so maybe we'll be at 600,000 by the end of the year, or there close to it, something like that. So, but debt allocated is going to be right at 1.8 by the time we close the year out.
Yes, that money has
So-
been paid.
So you're gonna see at year end $1.2 million at least deficit, right?
Yes.
So we're not covering. So this is a slide the community needs to understand. We're not covering, right, the falls development with tax-based revenues coming in. So when you talk, budgetary fiscal responsibility, where are you going to get that 1.2 million? That's this year. It could end up looking at you again next year, right? So that's why one way to do that is you be careful about how you spend money, right? You tighten up your expenditure so you're able to handle that delta, because if the revenues fall south, that 1.2 million could grow to 2 in a heartbeat. So that's one of the big dilemmas that we've got right here. That falls has not developed, and we're not bringing in the tax revenues to cover the bond payments. And so you're wanting to set $1 million aside, but it sounds like you're nervous about that. You want probably even more than $1 million to be set aside.
The way our budget is going to work out, we will have $1 million if council takes the finance committee's recommendation from 18-19. There is $1 million in 19-20 as well. As long as we keep those monies budgeted there, we have options. We have a plan that is workable, and we're working it.
I like the recommendation. I think it's good that we're setting this aside, and I would hope that we do take the recommendation. And thank you for all your work on this.
Yeah, I'm just hung up on what to commit it to. You're saying commit it to the general, which at least your flexibility, but we know we got things that the school system really needs that needs to be committed to, and I'm not sure why we're reluctant to commit more than the 200,000 when we know we've got other issues that need to be taken care of.
Mayor, and I certainly would defer to the city manager. I would be very careful how much of the 1.5 that we spend. Looks like we're already going to earmark 100,000 of it. That's all the funds the city has right now over the unassigned fund balance
Oh, I understand
policy.
that completely.
So
I get that.
I would be hesitant to expend any of those. We've searched for a name for it at the committee level. I think some people like rainy day fund, some people don't, because it's anyway. So that was a long way of saying, my recommendation is we would spend as little of that as possible, because the city is very close to its legal debt margin. We always need to remember that. Our options are limited.
I would add to that until you get that balance up to probably $3 million, I wouldn't earmark anything out of that for, I would prefer to have 5 million, but I think that's too much. But I think if you had 3, that would be sufficient to cover things such as an emergency fire truck go down or something of that nature. It would, I think earmarking any of that specifically right now, I just don't think we can do that. I think once you get over a $3 million mark, then you start potentially setting aside funds to committed projects.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned the term super majority. Explain that to everybody if you would.
Well, a supermajority just requires 4 out of 5 council members to vote for the item and approve it.
Okay. Is it possible, if council's willing, to set up like a rainy day fund, Mr. Hartley mentioned, and not rush in spending this money and allocating it, but put it in a rainy day fund with the intentions of a supermajority, you come and you request whatever your need is to pull from that account with a supermajority, 4 out of 5, to okay the expenditure on that. And it's not earmarked for anything. The city can use it for whatever it sees fit to use it.
If I'm not mistaken, the way that policy reads, and I don't have it memorized, but I think the policy reads it has to be for an emergency on that supermajority. Is that?
No, what it states with the supermajority is funding, that council may, it could be used to fund an additional reserve for use during an emergency or during periods of economic uncertainty or budget adversity, which it does give council that flexibility. Such additional reserves, it goes on to say, shall be determined by city council. The goal of that was to get to 1 million. That's the language in, on page 2 of the fund balance.
Well, I read that, I interpret that as being broad enough that if we had a crisis, a need, we can pull that money with the supermajority.
Well, I think if it's set aside just in a committed general fund, we'll call it a rainy day fund, that it would require a 3-2 vote to have that happen. I think at least from my understanding, the intent on that policy was to maybe go ahead and set aside a rainy day fund, and then this restricted fund that required the supermajority was for another set of funds that was to be set aside that would require the supermajority piece. I mean, definitely it could be set into that supermajority right now. The practical question that always comes to mind is, what if we have an emergency and only 3 agree that it's an emergency? And then the money can't be spent.
Well, that was the purpose of that language, is because when you get into a situation that we found ourselves in as a city, to where irresponsible financial decisions have been made, we wanted to make sure it was more than just a 3-2 that decided where that money would go. That you just couldn't go on the whim of council one way or another to spend that money. So it was there for a reason, because we're too much in extremis on where we are financially, and to not put it in there and have, you know, a supermajority vote just says one more time to me is we're not serious about the financial condition of the city. So either we're serious or not, we're not. So I'm not sure I understand this putting it in a general commitment. Now, if we put in a general commitment and you tell me that it still takes supermajority to pull it out and apply it to a certain account by formal application of the school board or however you're going to pull it out, then I get a little bit more comfortable with that. But to put it in there and just say, now we're still back to a general 3-2 vote says, well, we can just spend it on a whim, that doesn't set too well. And I don't think that's going to set well with the community either, because I want people to be accountable for how this money, where this money goes and how it goes. Because this is precious money that we've worked hard to build up. And it should take a supermajority because it's serious.
I don't think we need to take, are you looking for an answer tonight?
No.
No,
I think we need to soak this in.
Well, I do too, sir. I was just opening this up for you all to discuss. I think, as I said in my presentation, we need to make a decision on these funds before June 30th.
Okay.
I wasn't sure everyone was through speaking.
Well, I would say a little bit more detail is going to be needed, like what are the real emergent needs that these departments see that are serious needs? I mean, serious needs. And we know the school system's got needs that are well above the 200,000, right? And I know public safety's got it, so we need to see that. We need to go ahead and see that and talk about that as part of this. And then the debt, you know, the debt we just looked at. So those are right in front of us, and those aren't going to go away. So what are they? List them out. What are the dollars that we would need to take care of those and check them off? You know, to be responsible, not kick the can down the road. That's what we need to talk about.
And also, we need to talk about where we're at on the jail annex.
Actually, I've got a meeting scheduled. It's either tomorrow or I can't remember. One day this Thursday to meet with the architect, or we'll have a conversation with the architects in regards to how to move forward. I can tell you that the plan that was submitted just to get us the numbers that we need for the jail annex was roughly $62,000, I think. I want to say $62,000 or $64,000 to go ahead and do the architectural plans and get everything in place. So we're having a meeting Thursday to discuss that.
But it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was projected that annex is gonna be somewhere around $750,000.
That would be a safe estimate.
So that's half of what we're talking about
Right.
here. And that's a great need in this city. So, I mean, absorbing that 1.4 could easily be done, but we just need to be smart about it, how we're gonna do it. And I'm with, Mr. Hartley on a rainy day fund. We do need to start setting aside a rainy day fund. But we need to continue the conversation about the jail annex also.
And honestly, I think there's going to be another in-depth conversation we're going to have as a management team and council in regards to that jail in the near future.
I have a comment, and it's, I guess, going back about the school system again. You know, 6 months ago, the majority of the council voted no to consolidate and close down 3 of the current elementary schools. And we voted differently, and we voted differently for different reasons. But so then, you know, what was asked for in the budget was, you know, $14 million to fix up our current buildings. So I think, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about committing the 100,000 here and 100,000 there to start, and it's definitely just a drop in the bucket. But I think it's easy to see why we're not approving a budget where we're giving $14 million to the school system to fix up all of our schools right now, which what was asked for by the superintendent. I think it's easy to see that money's just not there, and there's, you know, we talked about the needs as far as the jail, the landfill, police cars and fire trucks, plus also our debt payments we have to make. So, you know, we talked a little bit about how much goes to the school and how it goes to them and what they'll be spending it on, but I guess part of that comes down to that's what the short-term plan is, and then also still have the discussion open about our schools regarding our long-term plans as far as, you know, where we go from here, because there's still a lot of work to do on that. But
Well, I know there's been some things said tonight about public safety. I want to assure council that in regards to the public safety items, when we went through the capital budget this past, I think we started that in January or February, and we scored everything based on needs for the next 5 to 6 years of what each department needed. We have a plan to meet all those capital needs over the next 5 to 6 years, which I don't believe the city has ever had a plan on how to deal with those needs, which will eventually put the city in a position where we're actually rotating vehicles, not only police cruisers, but fire trucks, you know, our vehicles that our solid waste disposal fund uses on a regular basis, so that we're not spending, you know, untold thousands of dollars on a yearly basis trying to Band-Aid vehicles just so they operate. I think there was a comment maybe Mr. Pollard made earlier that trash wasn't getting picked up regularly, and that's simply because our trucks are breaking down to the point that we can't keep them on the road on a regular basis now. I know our grass truck has broken down, which is the same truck that picks up leaves in the fall. Our normal trash trucks are breaking down, and it's just, I hate to say it this way, but it's one thing after another when it comes to those vehicles. It's, but we're actually putting plans in place to where hopefully we won't have that in the future as long as we follow the plan that's set in place. So I don't want the council or the public to think that we're not thinking about those capital items that we need, because we are, and we do have that plan put in place, and I've presented that plan. And the other piece of that puzzle is we can try to come up with all the unknowns, but it's to put a price tag on unknowns. I don't know if we can probably come up with a reasonable price tag on some of the most likely scenarios, which would be a fire truck getting into a vehicle accident and overturning and destroying a fire truck or something of that nature. But as far as every emergency unknown, I don't know how we could do that with any relative.
Well, what we're saying is every organization, whether you're a business or otherwise,
well, you do the risk
you got to have
analysis.
some money
Right.
sitting there in case something happens. So you got to put something that makes sense
Right.
to you.
Well, I
right?
think
So you
that, and
gotta
I
come
think
up with that.
talking about the rainy day fund, I think that's the first step in figuring out, you know, for
And I think
those.
we need to stop calling it the rainy day fund, because we don't have a fund approved. We officially called the rainy day fund, but we need to talk about.
We need to come up with a name for it.
We
then.
gotta come up with a name for it. We, you know,
Right.
city emergency fund
Right.
or something,
Something.
and make a policy change where that's what it's for, and it
Right.
states that, right?
I'm glad you mentioned trucks because I was going to say, I think it's important everyone also knows. So my understanding is, so the fire department, we're getting a new ladder truck, and that's coming from money that was kind of already there.
It's already been in the budget.
And then in a few months, there's also going to be a new engine.
That's correct,
Coming,
which
so-
is money that was already budgeted for.
Do we know when the last time was we got some new trucks and engines at the fire department? How many years it's been?
Most of those trucks are 20-some odd years old. Probably the newest truck, my guess would be 15 years old.
I mean, I think we're taking steps in the right direction to update our fleet.
Now, we did
there.
get a hazmat truck. A lot of that, I think, was purchased with some grant funds. We got that last spring, I think. So, but that was a relatively inexpensive purchase of $70-some thousand.
Well, your chief financial officer's making headlines. She's doing a good job for you, so she's got us with a little bit of cash in the bank and
That's why
earning
I keep her
interest.
around.
I do want
Keep
to,
cracking the whip.
I do want to just say that, that we have good decisions to make now, that we've met the unassigned fund balance policy. We're no longer borrowing money to pay operation or payroll expenditures, and now we're beginning to have choices. Thank you.
I was going to say, I would add that what the city manager said, we're actually putting money in each year's budget for those capital needs, which wasn't there before. And, you know, I don't know, I use rainy day fund because I don't know a different term, but I don't know if that's right. But I mean, as that grows at some point, just like we did with the unassigned fund balance, we probably need to put a number to that, you know, not maybe an absolute number, but a percentage of the budget, and say it needs to be 5 to 10%, somewhere in that range. And then after that, move it to wherever, because I think the worst thing to do would be to have money that's committed for one thing or to put so many restrictions where we're committed for one specific purpose and you can't get to it if something happened. And there's so many right now unknowns that could potentially happen. But the thing is, I think the unknowns that we're not even think of is the ones that probably will catch us. So it's always good to have that money there.
Anything else? All right, consent agenda. What's the pleasure, council?
Move to approve as written.
Second.
All right, move to approve as written by Mr. Wingard, second Mr. Osborne. Any discussion? All right, please call the roll.
Yes.
Hartley.
Yes.
Osborne.
Yes.
Wingard.
Yes.
Mumpower.
Yes. Oh, adjourn, sorry.